I want to introduce Dr. Chou. So he has a long and illustrious career before he kind of got into cloud computing. But the part I'll focus on is when he started really on when that was just getting started in 1999, when you were brought back to Oracle to launch and run Oracle On Demand. And out of that experience, as I understand, you wrote this book in 2004 called The End of Software. And in that book, it's really one of the first works that talks about software as a service, which of course is now a household kind of term today. And in fact, in that, you mentioned three then startups that are now also businesses that just about everyone knows. So VMware, NetSuite, and Salesforce. Shortly after you wrote that book, you launched the class we'll be talking about today, the cloud computing class, in 2005. And so right on the heels of that, and as we were talking about, shortly after that, in 2006, I think just 6 months after that class probably debuted, Amazon launched some of the real inaugural cloud services, the infrastructure cloud services. So S3 and I think EC2, so the computing and storage services.
Technical.
What?
I thought you weren't technical.
Well, I'm not technical, so I have to do a little bit of research. So really, this class is embedded, and your work is really, you were at the forefront of it and thinking about, writing about, and as a practitioner and visionary for cloud computing. And obviously you've done a lot of things since then. And in fact, I should note, you were teaching with SCPD far before the cloud computing seminar. So you were teaching, I believe, computer architecture in the electrical engineering department. So you have a long history there as well. Kind of, it's not, and maybe that wasn't the cloud, but teaching online as well. And then most recently, so there's a long history here, but in 2020, you launched a company that's using the edge cloud to really transform pediatric care, and hopefully we can hear a little bit more about that experience.
Yeah.
So we're really excited to have you here today, an opportunity to talk about the class and use that as an opportunity also to think about the cloud more generally. So I think for those in the audience who are like me, non-technical, it would be great to get a definition of the cloud, because I think often I just think of it as the internet until you really dig down into it, and I know they're not synonymous. So what is the cloud?
Yeah, so well, first of all, Pax, thanks for having me. Thanks for doing this. We really, this class is, I think, very unique in the world, and so getting the word out for both kids that are here at Stanford as well as the wider communities. Thank you for doing that. So what is a cloud? I mean, fundamentally, if you start to think about it in a different way, you would go that what the cloud is really a supplier who builds software like an application, or maybe builds hardware like a server, says rather than you have to manage the security of it, the availability, the performance, right, the change in that software, which is where we all came from. We used to have to do that. Why don't I do that for you? So I'll do that for you as Salesforce for CRM applications. I'll do that for you for storage and compute. That's what Amazon's doing. So fundamentally, it's a shift from the old world where, and in corporate America, I have whole teams of people having to do this work to manage the infrastructure, manage the applications, the suppliers now, and obviously the ability for a network, which we have today, to perform was key to making all this possible. But that clearly had happened by, let's call it the dawn of this, which is really late 99, early 2000. So the other point to make is that there's two aspects. One is what I said, which is it's about the supplier doing that. The second part is really the economic advantage of doing that. Because if you think about it, in the old world, if I sent you a piece of software, well, the way you managed it and the way I managed it, and the way somebody else managed it might be completely different. And by the way, done by humans, right?
Right.
But if I standardize, if I say, no, I'm just going to do it for this piece of software, and I'm going to upgrade it on Tuesdays at 2 o'clock or whatever, then I can progressively standardize, repeat, and automate the process. Well, if I automate it, then all that labor that used to be used to go manage this technology, these applications, this infrastructure, I can replace with computers, which, by the way, are a hell of a lot cheaper.
Right.
They operate pretty much flawlessly compared to humans, and therefore, in a great sense, are actually more secure than the world we have come from. And that economic shift is the other big thing that happened. Not only was technology made available, but also the economics. So it really started, as you already kind of pointed out, early on with applications. That's what we did at Oracle. We tried to deliver the Oracle ERP CRM applications as a service, obviously Salesforce with CRM, NetSuite with ERP, all started to do this in applications first. And then Amazon really led the game over in infrastructure by saying, no, not just applications, but compute and storage. And the economic thing they did, the business model shift they made, which was huge, was, oh, by the way, you can have this computer for an hour, and then you can give it back to me.
So the resource is just much more flexible.
Enormously more flexible, right? And so it removed me having to do any of this, which is why every startup on the planet uses somebody's cloud infrastructure, right? Was why do I want to go manage this, as well as the economic advantage of being able to do this.
Yeah, one of the interesting points, so I didn't mention in my bio of you, is that you also have a sort of a trilogy of books on cloud computing that came out in, I think, 2015, somewhere around there. And in it, what was really interesting, sort of going through it, is how much you emphasize that business case. And one thing that I had no idea, and that was very interesting, is you were saying when you buy software, that's not where the cost is going to come in. You were saying, I think the number you quoted, and I could be totally wrong, but it's like 4 times the cost of the software is what you will be spending annually to maintain it if you're maintaining it on premises, which blew my mind.
Good memory. Good memory.
So,
yeah.
That's so
it's enormous.
So that's the business change, the economic change.
Absolutely.
And so, and I think you also mentioned, as you mentioned now, that kind of the big innovation that Amazon introduced was, again, not necessarily the technical side, though there were obviously technical challenges that they had to address, but was the business model. And so if things got started in the early 2000s in terms of applications, in terms of the infrastructure moving to the cloud, what's on the horizon now? What have been the interesting developments, especially coming off of a few years where many of us were really living in the cloud in terms of everything we were doing was being held online?
Yeah, so let me just highlight a couple of things, and I like to split between infrastructure and applications to think about this. So on the infrastructure side, I mean, Amazon's continued to innovate. I mean, the number of services on top of the EC2 S3 is immense. It's in the hundreds, right? And I think one of the areas they have been particularly interested in, is kind of, part of everybody's conversation, is the world of AI. And in particular, right, how does AI really begin to help programmers? It's a weird thing to think about taking programmers out of the loop, and how do I use AI to do that? They're also helping people kind of start to learn about this. So there's a project they have out there called Deep Racer. People ought to take a look at it. It's really, you get to go program an autonomous virtual car.
Oh, wow. Okay.
To try to begin, because I think we do, and, obviously Stanford's at the forefront of this, but across the world, right, a lack of understanding of what capabilities this type of technology has, which really is formed from the basics of cloud computing. If you've spent any time in the world of deep learning, that really, to get more accurate predictions, more accuracy, you need 2 things. You need more data, and you need more compute. Well, guess what? Getting more and more compute is part of what cloud infrastructure. So Amazon's pushing that. I'll highlight another company, Teradata. In fact, I was just at, I'm on the board, we're just at a New York Stock Exchange event 2 days ago, and they've just introduced at the database level, right, the ability to have not only data lakes, but data warehouses, what some people call lake houses, as infrastructure as a service, to now start to provide higher level services, not just the compute and storage, but the ability to do analytics on structured and unstructured data. So that's a step many people are making, because analytics is huge in everybody's business. Another one, just to highlight, one of the things I've been able to do is I'm part of the Alchemist Accelerator, which is actually a little bit of a Stanford spin out, because Robbie and I are all part of, kind of the community. But we had a number of great stories. So I'll just highlight one. There's a company out there called Yoda Scale. which is very early on at Alchemist. And what they're endeavoring to do is to help people manage the cost, because the good news is it's easy to get this stuff. The bad news is, from the CFO's perspective, is, well, you know, Pax, do you really need that instance? So Yotascale's using technology to help do cost management of what is a burgeoning amount of resource being used, you know, by people like Hulu or Disney or whatever, right? And it has an interesting implication on sustainability, because if you think about it, in an information age, the smokestack is the computers.
Right. Yeah.
They're generating all the carbon. So not only is managing efficiency cost-wise, but also, you know, from a carbon perspective. So that's kind of, I'll say, a couple little highlights of what's cool on the infrastructure side. If you move over to applications, I'll say increasingly companies that historically have operated on premises have moved to delivering all their applications as a cloud service. I'll highlight one, Blackbaud, which many people probably don't know, but they are a company that's dedicated to building cloud applications for social good. Their customers are people like Save the Children. I think Stanford's a customer, because they started out really in helping people do fundraising. They pretty much moved their entire stack. In fact, I think right now only like 2% of their customers operate in the old on-premises world. The rest of it's operating in the cloud world, using their applications as a cloud service, and Azure and
right.
Amazon as the infrastructure, right? And they're about to hit $1 billion. In fact, the plan is next year there'll be $1 billion as a business, right? I'll give you another one. There's an interesting company, again, an Alchemist accelerator company called Umnitsa. Umnitsa has seen this explosion in the use of, you know, whether it's laptops, cell phones, cloud infrastructure applications in the enterprise, and is now saying, hey, Mr. or Miss CIO, why don't you have an application so you can manage that incredibly complex? And remember, these days, that technology is now in people's houses, right?
Yep.
And how do I manage the security? How do I manage offboarding an employee? All the different things I have to think about doing. How do I use computers to go do that? And that's just an example of, there's so many at this stage, you know, what I call application cloud services, spurred by the availability of infrastructure cloud services.
That's really interesting. We're going to sort of dive into the class a little bit, but just a couple quick follow-up on the infrastructure side. Do you see, so, you know, again, and this is the non-technical layperson, I think of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google as the big infrastructure side providers. You mentioned AI. Is that creating, I've also heard that that's kind of opening up a space for more niche providers of those services that are tailored specifically towards AI. Is that kind of what you're saying with the analytics? There's an opportunity, competition is entering in providing those kind of niche storage and compute services that are maybe around specific functions. Is that a fair statement? And if so, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, make two comments. One, I'd say the big boys, meaning Amazon, Google, Azure, are all increasingly providing more capabilities to deliver the ability to train AI algorithms where there's a lot of compute required. In fact, as some people are aware of, there are specialized hunks of hardware being built by guys like Google to go do this sort of thing. So it is not lost on them either that this is not interesting. I think in any industry, as you get bigger and bigger, there is the chance for specialization. So it is entirely possible. And this could be specialization by location, because one of the things that the big cloud, infrastructure cloud providers is really they operate out of 10 data centers in the world, right? Not 100, not 1,000. There are reasons why it might be better to be closer to the source of the information from communication point of view, but also increasingly, I think in the world we're living in, there's increasingly walls going up that, because I've been working a lot in healthcare, there's increasingly walls going up even between Europe and the United States. Like, we're not sharing. Right. So this calls into question, yes, we're going to have to start to move the infrastructure, perhaps to specialized players, perhaps to different kinds of cloud service players as well.
That's really interesting. So, I mean, that's when you think of the cloud, you think of it's kind of it just exists, you know, out there in the cloud, but in fact, it has this infrastructure, and that it sounds like that might even become more important in some senses as the world, the political world, sort of changes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Well, so, you know, with that, I want to learn more about what we're going to be doing, you know, this year in the cloud computing class. But so back in 2005, why did you start CS309A? Is the Stanford number, the cloud computing seminar?
Yeah.
What compelled you to do that? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So as you indicated in the opening comments, I taught core computer architecture as kind of as a hobby. I'd leave work, come to campus, teach class. It was kind of fun, you know.
I taught a graduate seminar. It was just a class as a hobby. So
yeah, well, I could tell you the whole story about how that happened. But anyway, I was doing that, and so I taught for 15 years. Actually, every other quarter, you know, core curriculum. What in those days was called CS 110 and WE 181 for old timers. And so there came a day where I actually had to fly to Bali to do a sales kickoff meeting and get back in 36 hours to teach class. And I was going, this is getting to be a little ridiculous. So I gave myself a sabbatical, a leave of absence. So as you said, I was at Oracle, and I decided at some point, you know, I was going to leave. And so I was hanging around campus. And for those of you guys in computer science who know Claire Stager, Claire and I know each other for lots of years, obviously. And so Claire is like, well, why don't you come back and teach? I was going, God, it's a lot of work. She said, well, you could do a seminar class, right? And so I started thinking about the fact that, and, you know, because I was on campus some of the time, people would say, you know, where's the computer science department? You know, and, you know, over time you go, well, you point to the Gates building. But I was starting to think about, well, why do I point to the Gates building? Why am I not pointing to the geology and the physics and the sociology and the psychology buildings? Why do I not think that, right? And so it made me think a lot about, well, how is it that we get the wider population, our students in medicine, law, right, the liberal arts, to really begin to appreciate what this technology could do to reshape any of these areas, right? And so obviously, because I've been around here for a while, you know, I knew a lot of people, and I said, well, why don't I put together a class where I do the first and last lecture? And by the way, they're probably pretty identical, back to not working too hard. And in between, I would have 8 guest lectures, and all my guest lectures would be CEOs of public companies to come and tell their story, in essence, which obviously I'm not trying to get down to how do you provision an EC2 instance, right? But why and how were they using this technology to begin to bring a wider group of people into this? So we very much campaign. In fact, I just sent a bunch of emails out to my friends in the law school. We have had a good number of kids out of the law school because I say, look, the intersection between the law and computer science, software, AI is on us. And, you know, I would claim we can easily today see how stupid the laws are because nobody really understands the technology. So is it going to be that we teach all of our computer science kids about the law?
Right.
Or do we teach the law students, maybe not the, you know, I don't care if you could be a Python programmer, but can you understand the concepts and why, the economics, et cetera, so that we make more informed decisions in the law, in medicine, in the liberal art, across the board? And that was kind of my mission. And, you know, over time, I learned that people were not offended to be asked to deliver a guest lecture at Stanford. So some of the kids now call the class People Tim Wants to Listen To.
And so that's interesting. So it's not primarily, you know, one thing that is interesting in terms of our portfolio is we have a lot of seminars, but they're highly technical. So it's researchers in AI coming in and talking about the latest algorithm or the latest, you know, way to verify a, you know, a neural network or something like that. This is not as technical. This is more focused on the business side of a very specific technology as well. Can you talk a little bit more about, your student body and, what your students are getting? What are your computer science students getting out of it versus what are your, say, law or business students getting out of it? Is it the same thing? I mean, what are they bringing that's unique, or what are they getting out of it that's unique in the way this class is set up?
Well, you may appreciate this. One of the things I think all the kids, I call them the kids, all the kids I've taken, I think they do get a lot out of it. So what do they get out of it, right? I think on the one hand, I have a requirement to get, it's a 1-credit class. So I have a requirement. One of the requirements is that they ask a question, because I start out the class the same way. I go, the mark of a great student is not measured by what you know, but by the questions you ask. So I want you to learn to ask good questions. And so just as practice,
right,
before every lecturer shows up, I have a shared spreadsheet, and there's Pax's name and Pax's question for Raghu from VMware. And I think that helps, right? Because then they get a little bit deeper into, well, what the heck does VMware do, or GitLab? I mean, for some people they already know, but a lot of people don't. Right. So they begin to develop an appreciation, because I always tell the lecturers, unless you're Google or Facebook, nobody knows what you do, including General Electric, by the way. So, I think that gets them a little deeper into the world, one. I think the second thing that I hope they register out of it is that, all CEOs are not college dropouts who wear hoodies, right? I mean, it is a vast, different profiles of what you see there, right? And their stories are across the spectrum, right? In fact, one of the things I always do when the lecturer shows up, and I say to him, hey, I want you to tell me a story which you would not know about you from the internet. And so
this would be I should have asked you that question. By the way, now I feel like I'm being graded if my questions aren't good enough.
You're doing it right, Max. And so, just a simple example, Martin Rischenhagen, who was the CEO of AGCO, one of the largest agricultural equipment manufacturers in the United States, actually asked his board if he could coach the German equestrian team in the Olympics. Like, who the heck would have?
Okay.
Right? We've had George John. This is great. One of the things I do is every year I look to see what companies just went public, right? Along with my kind of standing list. And that year, Rocket Fuel had gone public. And so I'm like, okay, by this time I learned I could just send email in. So I said, oh, hi, their CEO's George John. Hey, George, would you like to come and do a lecture? And so I get a reply back. Oh, yeah, Tim, I'd be interested. P.S. I was your student a few years ago. And I went, really? So we met, and for those who had taken this class, one of the things we would have the students do was build a small multitasking kernel.
So this is for the
this is for my computer architecture class. We go back in time, and George says, yeah, he must have taken the class in the spring, because he went home for summer vacation. He was sleeping in. He said, yeah, my mom woke me up and said, what, you're so lazy. Why are you still sleeping in? And he goes, Mom, you don't understand. I just wrote a multitasking kernel. So we've had this range, right? PhD students from Stanford, people who do equestrian, and I think that helps the kids see the range of what's possible out there and not imprint on one particular pattern. And as a result, we've had quite a few. I mean, I'll just hit one that's kind of fun. There's a team out of the class 2019 that launched a new company called Nooks.
Oh, we're familiar. Yeah, we know Nooks.
But you should know Nooks.
Yeah.
And that's Daniel and a bunch of those guys that were in that class who decided to go do that and, build kind of a very new, we'll call it collaboration environment, particularly focused these days in the sales world. But that's just an example of, I think, whether the class was the reason, but I think I've heard this from a number of them, that it has inspired them, pushed them, made them think what was possible, rather than what I do believe a lot of people walk into Stanford particularly and think, well, shit, if I didn't, write a multitasking kernel when I was 12 years old, I got no business in this. which is, patently not true. So.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, we know Nook. I mean, it was because that must have launched just before or just during the pandemic. So it was something they were rolling out in a lot of classes here, just as a kind of alternative way to do office hours, grading parties, watch parties. So that's interesting. I didn't realize that started as a team in your class. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Well, so what's on, that's a great segue because, when we're talking, last time you ran this class was in 2019, was it 2019? I think one of the last speakers was the CEO of Zoom at the time. So again, a very prescient or, serendipitous invitee in this course. It's been on hold for 2 years because of the pandemic. Now it's coming back. So what's on offer for the class this year? And has that changed at all in the last 2 years in terms of how you're thinking about or the invitations? How did the last 2 years influence who you're thinking about inviting this year?
Yeah, but just to tell a small story since you brought up Eric. Eric Rand was actually, I went back and looked, I think it was the last lecture of that year of 19. And one of the things, just to make a comment, because I think a lot of people think about, oh, well, the reason people do start companies is to make millions of dollars and whatnot, which obviously Eric's done well. But he talked a lot about, he was actually at the original WebEx and was there for a lot of years. And he said, the reason I started Zoom was, the customers we had just were not happy. And I knew we could make them happy. And it's just fascinating that motivation resulted in today a noun, a verb, and an adverb.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So just as a quick on Eric. So so who's coming this year? We always, I think, our lineups are pretty all-star. So remember I said I wanted to get to law school and et cetera. So I happened to do a talk for Morgan Lewis, which is actually the 4th largest law firm in the world. And by that, I met Jamie McCone, who's their firm chair. And so I asked Jamie to come and speak. So one of our speakers this year is actually the chairman of the 4th largest law firm in the world.
Now is that a departure from your usual list? Is this someone who's not going to talk about the business, but is not themselves in a business that's delivering a cloud app or a cloud infrastructure?
True. And to your question, yes, she's as far off as I've gotten because they are, well, the law does consume cloud services. But obviously, one of the things that I invited her for is because we know that the law, privacy, et cetera, is starting to impact how we use technology, whether on the consumer side or on the enterprise side. So that's really her. But, over time, I branched out. I got particularly interested in the so-called Internet of Things, which is how I ended up having the chair of, the CEO of AGCO, which is the 4th largest, one of the largest agricultural equipment manufacturers, which, by the way, led to, and just as a teaser, I have been inviting. There's a lady who is the CEO of TAFE, which is the largest agricultural equipment manufacturer in India. And I've had a deliberate move to try to get CEOs of public companies who are women to come and do my class. The list is not enormous, right? In fact, I had Patty Pope a couple of years ago. She was CEO of CMS Energy, which is Michigan's energy company. Very interestingly, she started out her talk, which is why I talk about kids learn a lot of different things. She got up there and said, people ask me how work-life balance works. I suppose they ask me that because I'm a woman. And she goes, I think it's the wrong question. And she proceeds to go into, which I have introduced people, there's a whole Japanese philosophy called ikigai. And she proceeded to do like a 10-minute dissertation on ikigai, which is extremely cool. She talked a lot about energy. At the end, I was talking to her. I said, Patty, could you come to PG&E and help us out? Well, damned if, like 9 months ago, she is the new CEO at PG&E.
Wow. Okay. Well.
So anyway, so we have Jamie, which is a little bit out of scope. On the infrastructure front, Raghu, who's the CEO of VMware. VMware really is the cornerstone of what people refer to as private cloud computing. So it's really cool that he's able to be here. The other one is Sid, who's the CEO of GitLab. All the CS kids know what the hell GitLab is, but Git is really the major repository for code. So if you are a software developer or you're using software, your software is on their software, and that is infrastructure for building other things, right?
So is this GitHub? Is it the same or
Hub? Yeah. So Hub got bought by Microsoft, and Lab is
okay. There you go.
A lot of the guys who So
okay. So they're two separate.
But it's in principle the same.
Okay.
It is providing similar services.
Gotcha.
The other interesting thing about Git, which I'm going to have Sid talk about, is they very early on talked about they wanted to build a decentralized business. This is prior to COVID. So there is no corporate headquarters. I mean, from day one, which is fascinating. Right. And the things that they have had to do in order to make that work, he's going to talk about it. I'm enormously fascinated with.
So we'll get a lesson in how to build a decentralized business.
Yeah, exactly.
That's interesting.
Couchbase, I didn't want to forget, Matt Cain's coming with Couchbase. Couchbase is a specialized open source database software. So that's going to be cool. When we move over to applications, I'm having the CEO of Samsara come. Samsara, this Internet of Things area, which is really, if you look at it, most of the technology we've built up until now services the financial service world, the media world, Netflix, whatever, right, and the telco world. That's dominates the spend, which is, by the way, 1/3 of the global GDP. 2/3 of the global GDP is everything else, which we will call manufacturing, but is actually automotive, healthcare, trucking, transportation, agriculture, all these other industries, which, as you and I were talking very early on, these industries, because they touch the physical world, move less quickly, even though they are enormous. So while the Internet of Things, and I'm not talking about smart toasters, I'm talking about enterprise, has been projected as being trillions and trillions of dollars, there's been no great liquidity event, no great startup that has come out of it, even though a lot of money's been thrown at it. Samsara stands unique in that. So they went public last year, and I'm really excited to have him come and talk, and really how did they navigate this is going to be very interesting, right? Which then gets to, as we said, we talk about things, and I've been interested in the healthcare space. The CEO of Illumina is coming. So for those people in the world of genetics and biomedical research, they all know who Illumina is, because Illumina is really kind of the 100,000 pound gorilla in the gene sequencing world, and the implications of that on everything in healthcare is enormous. That's going to be very cool. And then I'm having the chairman and CEO of Johnson & Johnson, who is number 26 in the Fortune 500. So I like to have a range from, relatively young companies to, very mature companies. And so we'll have that whole during this quarter.
That's fantastic. I see we're getting some questions, and I think they're relevant to kind of the direction you're already taking in terms of your speaker list. We talked a little bit about what's on the horizon on the cloud, and we're getting questions, what's next? What are the big technologies? What are going to be the big shifts? Do you see, you said that Internet of Things has been this big promise for a while, and it sounds like it's been slower to kind of really realize that promise. Do you still see Internet of Things as the next big thing in terms of cloud computing, or just as a technology? And what do you anticipate its impact to be?
Yeah, I think it's maybe at a macro level, the comment I said, look, we've all been pretty good at the stuff that is the not physical world, retail, right, obviously, financial services, right, where the change is really a change in an app. That's all that happens, right? But the change in the physical world, which we all do live in, right, is where there is enormous potential, right? How do we do precision agriculture, right? To be able to grow more food using less pesticides and less water, which is both more sustainable and healthier. Right. If I can now, which people are working on this, I can now map a piece of soil down to a square meter and know the boron level and make a choice based on that, which the technology is arriving to do all this stuff, the implications on the world, right, that we live in are enormous. So I think, you know, while these are all hard, and I'm, like I said, spending a lot of time in healthcare, they're all hard for a whole variety of reasons. The promise of what they can do into the future is enormous. So for those who are patient, and, you know, yeah, I know if you want to do a startup and 2 years later sell to Google, don't do this. Don't do this. But if you really are committed, and I met plenty of people committed to different areas here, you know, I think what technology is capable of today and what it will be capable over the next 3, 4, 5 years is just, it's crazy. I mean, I'll just give you one example because I'm spending time in healthcare. There's a condition that happens in kids where they get something called focal cortical dysplasia, called FCD, okay? Basically, and this is obviously I have no medical background, the neurons are too close together in your brain. So if you can detect this, which can be done with MRI scans and AI technology, you actually can go in and they call it resect, which I interpret as cut it a little bit apart, and the kid is cured for life. There's a kid in Florida right now who's had epileptic fits 2 times a day from the age of 18 months to 12 years old. They believe they figured it out finally. They've given him drugs. They wanted to put in implants and all this stuff. They think that this is what it is. If it is, he's cured for life. Now think about the implications of us being able to do that for any kid on the planet.
And what's the barrier to that right now? Why, you know, obviously not everyone maybe has an MRI, but if you have an MRI in Europe versus Florida, why can't they do that right now?
It goes back to a couple of things. One, I made mention that basically all the deep learning work, neural network work, is all based on the idea that I can feed enough data to these things to be able to train them. First of all, obviously that condition does not happen all the time. So you need to be able to aggregate data from many different locations, and this conversation of equity and diversity in AI is there, which is, you know, let's not train it on a bunch of old white guys, right? And then wonder why it doesn't work for other people. So one of the challenges, how do I get to it? How do I get to all of this, right? And then I think a second challenge is, okay, how do I bring this together, teams, which is the tricky part of both AI knowledgeable people and medical knowledgeable people to be able to build these applications. I think that's the other big challenge we face. But, you know, we can get there. This is not, right?
I'm sure the law factors in there as well, especially in sharing medical data.
Oh, no, believe me, the whole world of privacy preservation, which is why I've become enormously interested in federated learning as a technology. Yes, very interesting.
That's really interesting. So that's, you know, one thing I hear you saying is that especially as the cloud gets bigger and we can share more data, these kinds of rare events will have just more data. If it happens once in Florida and then once in Canada and once in Brazil, there's no way you can, there's no information sharing. You have no central data source, but as you can bring those together, you can start understanding and diagnosing those kinds of issues.
Yeah.
That's really, that's interesting. You know, you had mentioned earlier, and this is maybe another, thing on the horizon or something that's being talked about a lot now, is you had mentioned sustainability in the context of, as you said, your carbon footprint now isn't smokestacks, it's your data centers. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that and what you see the future of sustainability in cloud computing and how it can help address that or how it might exacerbate it?
Yeah, let me take that and take you down 2 paths.
Okay.
So one is purely for those people out there who follow the world of investment, there's a whole thrust referred to as ESG, environment, social governance, and it largely driven by the investment community. So if you're sitting in a boardroom, which I sit in a couple of them, it is a topic. So over on the environmental side, which is really the carbon question, just to let the listeners think about it, today a server and a human are roughly equivalent in how much carbon we generate. Okay. Yeah, it's kind of curious to think about that. So now the question becomes, if I'm a company, what is my employee to server ratio? Right? Because if I have very low ratio, meaning, yeah, I've got, you know, 1 million employees and I have 2 servers, who the hell cares? You know, drive your SUVs to work. It doesn't really matter. It's not the smokestack. But if it's the opposite, meaning for every employee I have 10 servers, then obviously my servers are the source of my carbon footprint. Now, what you will see is that the ratio of companies which are not the new generation companies is 10 times different than the ratio of the next generation purely information economies, Facebooks, the Googles, the Pinterest, all of these guys, right? And so when you're over there, which is why there has been interest. I know Amazon's been working in this area, right? In reducing their carbon footprint by virtue of making their servers run on, because obviously the servers are running, where's the carbon coming from? The carbon's coming from the electricity, right? So if I've got coal-fired plants, yeah, that's a big carbon footprint. And by the way, if you get to be a student of this, you'll realize different regions of the United States even have different carbon footprints relative to their power. But if I can run on a hydro, or if I can run on wind, right, then obviously my electricity is carbon. So a great deal of interest there to moving more and more to renewables as the source of the electricity to reduce the carbon footprint, given I'm an information focused company like the ones that we all know about are.
Now, do you think is there a potential kind of challenge there? If my servers are actually Amazon servers, then, you know, my server count to employee count could be very low, but I'm using a lot of storage and compute capacity, but it's essentially being outsourced to Amazon.
And you, in time, or maybe even now, what you should be doing is you should be asking yourself, what is the carbon footprint of the Amazon servers I'm using? And you can compute this. That's why I made comment about Yoda scales, work in cost management, is also you could translate that quite quickly, because you go, well, I can know how many servers, are they big ones, are they little ones? Am I running 24 hours or 2 hours? And you could compute, right, what is the carbon footprint of your usage of that Amazon service, right? And is, you know, how big is that?
So that's part of the next step, is being able to track that more.
You know, I think it's inevitable, given we all are moving to more information-based systems. I'll just make a little point. The S part, the societal part, I think I've been doing a little study of this area. Most of it today is really about what is the corporation's responsibility from a diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, you know, how many women do I have in the workforce? How many Black people I have in the workforce? Which is all great, but it's all internally focused. The question I think in front of us is what is the societal responsibility of corporations outside of the corporation, right? What is their responsibility to global health care? What is their responsibility to global education? I think these are questions that we're all going to start to ask, or we should be asking, right? Which all have implications on what are you going to do to impact global health care, to impact global education.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that's good. And hopefully some of your guests will be talking about or touching on
you know, yeah.
We're reaching near the end, and we do have a couple more questions. I'm going to choose one more, kind of on the horizon, just because it's another buzzword that's out there right now.
Good.
Can you talk a little bit about the metaverse in the cloud? What do you see? And now I know that's very much within the, you know, so you were talking about the, you know, media, you know, the Netflix of the world is already one of the big players or big things that are being delivered to the cloud. Is the metaverse a new thing in your opinion? Is this where is that in your thinking?
Yeah, well,
I mean, I don't, you know, what is the metaverse, I guess, is the other big question.
Yeah. So. Well, I think, let's try it this way. I think we all continue to look at different ways in which you interface with this technology, right? Today, it's largely the keyboard right? And we look at a screen. We're increasingly talking, so talking is a way.
Right.
But obviously, whether it's what people will call an augmented reality view of the world, meaning I can put glasses on where I can see some things that are coming from computers and some things that are living in the real world, which do have implications on things like manufacturing, construction, all these things where I would benefit from that. Or is it what people call virtual reality, which is you totally enclose the headset, et cetera. Obviously, this is, gaming has clearly been over here, et cetera. People, because I've been doing work in the physical world, there are people working in all of this, whether it's healthcare, construction, et cetera, you could think of it as provide a better experience, a deeper, a richer experience, right, to what you're doing, augmented by computers or replaced by computers. I think it's just an inevitability that we will get there. Some of it today is bound by cost, some of it's bound by power, some of it's bound by, writing the right software to go do this. And I think each step of the way, different parts of the industry are pioneering this. And, staring at a screen and touching a keyboard 20 years from now might look like an anachronism.
Interesting. We just got quite a few questions right off of that question.
Yeah.
Anything, so, I guess the last thing, I want to circle back to the class a little bit. And so we've talked about the class, talked about your history, now talking a little bit about what's on the horizon and also what's happening in this class. Anything in particular that you're excited about in this class? What are, you mentioned that this is, some people call this class people that Tim wants to talk to. So what are some of the things that you're really excited about asking and learning about? You already mentioned a few, but anything else you'd want to mention that you're really excited about to learn or ask in this upcoming cohort of speakers?
I will tell you what I always walk away learning from these classes is the unexpected part. Because I ask all the speakers, I basically just tell them there's 3 things I want you to do. Number 1, I want you to tell me about what you do, because like I said, unless you're Facebook or Google, nobody knows. Number 2, how does cloud computing, AI, 5G, IoT impact your business? What has it done? How has it impacted it? And then finally, what do you think, whether it's for your company or for your industry, how will this impact your industry in the future? And then the last thing I say is, look, you've got 100, 200 bright young minds sitting out there. What would you like to tell them? Yeah. And I think, which I encourage them to do this because this is for them, I always say, this is a very unique environment. This is not employees. This is not investors. This is not customers. None of that, right? And so I think, and they're inspired a little bit about the give back idea. So I think the things that they share, their life experiences, the things that they did, the mistakes that they made, whatever, it's just totally fascinating. And I could spend an hour telling you all those stories of the things that you learn from the stories that they tell, which are completely unscripted. It's just part of how they get up there and talk. And also part of how I try to structure the class, right? I tell them, look, every kid is asked a question. So they have questions. Now, the very first class, I usually have to kind of go, pull them. But by class 2, they're getting pretty good. And so that environment stimulates, right, I think, the type of conversation that happens and the type of knowledge that's transmitted, which is, to me, way beyond their company or their products or even technology.
And do you think, is that what the students are also getting out of it? So I asked that because, when we were advertising this, we got just a lot of people who saw us posting, and we're going to be talking with Dr. Timothy Chou. Oh, that's the best class I took at Stanford. That was my favorite class. We never get that with our other, our other webinar advertisements. So we were talking, what is it about this class? What is it that's so exciting for students? So do you think it's that element of the unexpected? What are the aha moments for your students? What do you think are those aha moments that they're taking away?
What I think, here's my theory of what happens. This class, if you're a freshman, which I encourage them to come and take it, it is not until 6 years later that they go, oh. So I think it's that, because of the nature of who is up there talking, how they speak, the stories they tell, that as time evolves, the student hears that story in their head. It becomes part of how they think about things,
right,
which I think is very powerful. We had, just a short plug for the DCI group. You're probably aware of this, right?
Yep.
The Distinguished Career. These guys found my class, like, I think the first year they did the program, right? So I'm sitting now looking out in the classroom and I see a bunch of old people. I'm like, what the hell are you doing here, right? But they clearly get this. I mean, day one, they're like, can I come back? I'm going to be back here, right? Because they know the value of what is being said there, how it's being said, who is saying it.
Right.
And that synthesis, which I could never go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think that's the power of this class, and the unique. I mean, it's enormously. There's nothing like this anywhere in the world.
I like that idea. So the aha moment's coming. That they're saying that was the greatest class, because they're like, now I realize that was the greatest. 5 years later, yeah, I should. But I also, what I thought was a really interesting point there is that, and I think this is something to pull out of it, is how much narrative plays in the way that the speakers are presenting to the students. It's not a formal presentation of here's how you create a multitask kernel processor or something like that. It's not that. It's personal stories. It's business stories, and those stories can stay with you in the way maybe technical information or statistics don't necessarily stay with you.
Oh yeah, and who the storyteller is.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to remind everyone, if you're interested in taking the class, even if you're not a Stanford student, you can do that. You can see a button right there on your console. You can click on it, find out more information about the class. If you happen to be joining us and you are a Stanford student, we also encourage you to enroll through Access. I think enrollment starts on September 1st for Stanford students. It's already started if you're someone in the community, a professional who's interested in taking the class. And we hopefully maybe we'll have Dr. Chou back again in the future to talk more about cloud computing in his class. Thank you again. It was a really wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pax. Yeah, I encourage all the Stanford kids, go tell your friends and neighbors about it. I mean, I'm always stunned, because on the very first day, I always go, how'd you know about the class? And it's the most mundane answers, like I found in course catalog. I'm going, God, modern technology, we have no better way of communicating.
Well, the course catalog's online now.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
It's,
anyway.
Yeah. Well, yes, please take the class. And again, as I said, a recording of this session will be made available in about a week. So if you missed some of it, it'll be available. It'll be available soon. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but they were fantastic.